Many African nations gained independence from France in the 1960s, but decades later, France's influence still looms over their economies, politics, and military affairs. Now, a growing movement is pushing to break free from what many call neocolonialism. But why? To understand this struggle, we need to go back in time. When France granted independence to its African colonies, it didn't really let go. Instead, it maintained deep economic and political ties, a system known as Françafrique. A study in the American Journal of Economics and Sociology explains how France secured control over African economies through one-sided commercial contracts and political influence. But perhaps the clearest sign of France's lingering control is money itself. Imagine using a currency controlled by a foreign country. That's the reality for 14 African nations that still use the CFA franc, a currency managed by the French treasury. This means these countries can't set their own monetary policies without France's approval. A study in Third World Quarterly calls the CFA franc a blatant example of neocolonialism, arguing that it keeps African economies dependent on France. And that's not the only way France keeps its grip on Africa. Let's talk about resources. Take Niger, for example. It's one of the world's top uranium producers, fueling France's nuclear power plants. But while France gets electricity, Niger struggles with poverty. The World Journal of Advanced Research and Reviews highlights how African economies remain structured to benefit French companies rather than local populations. But France's control isn't just economic, it's military too. For years, France has maintained military bases across Africa, justifying them as counterterrorism efforts. But many Africans see these forces as a tool of control rather than protection. That's why countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have recently expelled French troops. Reports from The Times and AP News show that these governments are now seeking to replace French forces with new allies, such as Russia's Wagner Group. And that brings us to the next big shift. Who will Africa turn to next? With trust in France at an all-time low, many African nations are looking eastward. China has invested heavily in Africa's infrastructure, while Russia has offered military cooperation. According to AP News, this shift marks a turning point in Africa's foreign relations, one that could redefine the continent's future. But this isn't just about politics or economics. It's about a new generation demanding real independence. Youth-led movements are rising across the continent, pushing for self-reliance and a break from colonial-era ties. The American Journal of Economics and Sociology notes that social media has amplified these voices, increasing pressure on governments to take action. As African nations forge new paths, one question remains: will they finally achieve true independence, or will history repeat itself?